When I was mulling over what I could talk about here, I kept coming back to a statement from the Case for Support for the Archaeology of Fashion Film project, namely that fashion historians, quote, have tended to treat film as historical evidence rather than as a fashion object per se. Not all fashion historians are crocheted the same way, but this seems to describe what I do most of the time. Depending on what kind of a film it is, I'm looking to find out what was actually worn, and also how clothes look and behave on a moving body. After they have entered the museum, clothes and accessories are usually never worn again. Most of the time, and I'm talking about my day-to-day work here, not about exhibitions, we are actively avoiding subjecting our objects to movement. It is relatively rare that I put a garment on a mannequin. Apart from time constraints, and the fact that mounting historic clothes usually takes more than one person, many garments are too fragile. I look at clothes on hangers, which does not do them justice. Like this dress, which I wanted to put on a mannequin to find out how contemporaries would have encountered it, but the lining of its bodice is too shattered. I also examine or present garments flat, laid out on a table or in a box. Many of you know this particular dress, which was designed to be worn on the stage by a famous musical comedy star, and might also have featured in a fashion show. This means quite a few photos of the dress in action exist, but when it comes to ordinary people, it is rare that both a garment and a photo of its wearer in it have survived. It happens primarily for weddings. Apart from costumes worn for performance, such as our pavlova tutu, I only know of one object donated to the Museum of London with film footage. Unsurprisingly, it is also a wedding gown. Most of the time it is not a problem, albeit frustrating, having to deal with garments off-body. We are all used to seeing clothes on hangers or flat and to imagining them worn. This does not always work, otherwise one would never have to return a mail order. Arguably it's even more difficult to visualize a type of garment one has never experienced wearing, and even more so how it would react to the wearer's movements. You can find contemporary still images that indicate how clothes might have behaved on moving bodies in the past. I suspect that more wrongly than rightly, I'm also influenced by period dramas. In polite company such as this, I like to pretend that this is my reference for crinolines in motion, but it is probably more likely this one. Arguably, moving as opposed to still images might be more revelatory in periods when clothes are less stiff and more extensive movement is allowed or even encouraged. In the first installment of her autobiography, The Rainbow Comes and Goes, Diana Cooper, née Manners, wrote about the time just before the First World War, when she was in her teens. Fashion had come round to us. Gone were the buttoned boots, the curves, the boned collars, the straight-fronted stays, the hennaed hair and hairnets. We subscribed to a fashion paper called L'Art et la Mode, with drawings by a then little-known artist called Trion. It was everything my mother had always stood for. Le vague, and lines of the body slinkily followed into the feet, loosely knotted hair, willowy independent, not armed for merciless conquest. I became an inspired dressmaker. A fit was no longer necessary. Cooper seems to talk about the very early 20th century, but more pertinent for what I want to discuss is Trion's work from a few years later. The new fluidity of drawings and clothes was also noted by Anne Hollander, who mentions the artists Giovanni Boldini and Paul César Helleux as being good at rendering what she calls a kind of sloppiness in dress and hairstyles with their indefinite slapdash strokes of paint or ink, in this case. Here's an example by Boldini. My focus for the rest of this talk is a film from the British Pathé archive, from around this period of sartorial liberation. On the company's website, it used to be entitled as Fashion's very early 20th century, 1914 to 1918. According to Pathé's summary, the film features footage of models displaying the latest fur fashions. The film is 5.5 minutes long, and I will show it in its entirety. Apologies for the quality. It is a silent film, and I will talk while it runs. Just a few words before we start. The footage consists of scenes filmed at different locations adjacent to a large building. At the very beginning, we fleetingly see an older man in a British military uniform. Apart from another, younger man in a lounge suit towards the end, the film features 15 women who are, however, never all in the same shot. There is also a dog. At some point, buses are visible in the background, indicating that we are probably in London or another large city. It is a windy day, perfect for the motion seeker. You will make your own observations, but here are a few things that I noted. The film seems to show several generations of women, but they don't seem to wear different kinds of clothes. Their dresses are ankle length, made on the whole of fluid materials, and cut relatively straight. It seems there's no definite fashion edict about the location of the waistline. It ranges from below the bust, in the case of a young woman in a white gown, to around the hip. Different materials, shiny silk, dull wool, fur, chiffon, lace, reflect the light and also react to the wind differently. Most female protagonists do not look corseted, apart from one, slightly fuller woman, whose dress looks somewhat old-fashioned. There is a great variety of hats, wide-brimmed, some made of lace, tocks, a hairy tricorn, and later very high helmet-shaped hat. Some hats have veils attached, one of which gets entangled, and later rises high up in the breeze. Twice the women and the officer walk in a single file towards the camera. Later it seems as if they are supposed to do this again in a garden, but it doesn't quite work out. While the dresses themselves are relatively simple, the accessories make the overall picture quite fussy. It's also because of the wind. Many women carry small bags, some have long necklaces. Furs have appendages or have to be held onto or moved around the body. One woman's skirt seems to consist of layers of fringes. Almost all the women wear light-colored gloves. An older woman, holding an umbrella, seems to wear a Russian-inspired hat and dress. Two women, one of whom wears the high helmet hat, keep themselves mostly separate. The other women form and reform smaller groups. Two of three late arrivals seem to be dressed more simply in tailor-mades with white blouses. The third latecomer wears a light-colored outfit with a strange square appendage hanging from her back. When the group is in the garden, you will see the military man running out of shot, fetching a fur that must have been dropped accidentally. At some point, several women point towards the sky or to a window high up in the building. Towards the end, one of the women seems to hold a large sheet or newspaper. Some women seem to speak to the person who is filming. It seems quite obvious that this film does not show models displaying the latest fur fashions. But why was it mistaken for that? And who are the actors? What is their stage? Much of my work at the museum is concerned with using dress to preserve or uncover lives that would otherwise be or already have been forgotten. This film, with its unknown protagonist and unidentified location, presented the kind of challenge I cannot refuse to accept. I started with the National Portrait Gallery website, assuming it should be possible to identify the military man. I discovered that many of the officers of the First World War were of a similar age, white hair, and sported a moustache. These are all different men. I gave up that line of inquiry to focus on some of the more striking-looking women who I hope to find in contemporary society magazines. Adele, Countess of Essex, was the daughter of a New York railway magnate and one of the so-called dollar princesses, rich American women who married into the English aristocracy to mutual benefit. When Adele's wedding to the 7th Earl was announced in November 1893, her family was, however, described as, quote, not wealthy in the modern sense of the word, not having an income beyond $15,000 or $20,000 a year. This changed when in 1915, the year before her husband died, Adele inherited $600,000 from her stockbroker uncle. Like many other women of her background, the Countess supported the war effort by being on the committee of several charitable organizations. In an interview with the New York Times, published in early 1916, Lady Essex talks about the effect of the war on women's clothes, which maybe has to be taken with a pinch of salt, but nevertheless chimes with what we see in the film. Lady Essex had two daughters, Iris, born in 1895, and Joan Rachel, born in 1899. I think it is the latter who accompanied her on filming day. Lady Joan's contemporary, Lady Diana Maud Nina Somerset, was born in 1898, one of three children of Henry Somerset, 9th Duke of Beaufort, who was ADC to King George V. The marriage of her sister Blanche to Lord Saint-Germain in June 1918 was one of the society weddings of the year. Both sisters, it is claimed in the Tatler here, worked assiduously for the war since the outbreak of hostilities. Before the wedding of Blanche, the sisters with their matching furs were often depicted together. Lady Diana led me to her mother, the Duchess of Beaufort. I'm quite certain the older woman with the umbrella is Lady Randolph Churchill, Winston's mother, another American, born 1854 in Brooklyn. The woman with the fringed dress could be yet another American, born Eloise Breeze in New York, who married Gilbert Heathcote Drummond Willoughby, 2nd Earl of Ancaster in 1905, and whose sister also married into the English aristocracy. Lastly, the young woman in the white dress could be Lady Ursula Grosvenor, the eldest daughter of Hugh Grosvenor, 2nd Duke of Westminster, also known as Bendor, the one-time lover of Coco Chanel. That still leaves quite a few people. The young woman with a veiled hat, the lady with a fruity hat, the two women who keep themselves separate, the young woman with a pointy chin, the three latecomers, and the young man with the bowler hat. But let's go back to our officer and the woman who seems to be the hostess, greeting guests on the stairs. She turned out to be Lady Susanna Holford, who, having been widowed, had married Sir George Lindsay Holford in 1912. Sir George, a career soldier, was extra equerry to King George V and equerry to Queen Alexandra. Sir George's great-grandfather had made his fortune supplying London with fresh water. Sir George's father had commissioned Dorchester House in Park Lane, a palazzo of vast proportions, built in 1853. Both fortune and Dorchester House were inherited by Sir George in 1892. When this photo was taken, Dorchester House was used as American embassy. It is said that in 1907, the American ambassador invited 4,000 guests to celebrate the 4th of July. During the war, the building was offered as a military hospital, but it is not entirely clear whether the offer was taken up. After Sir George's death, in 1926, Dorchester House was put up for sale and demolished in 1929 to make way for the Dorchester Hotel. One of my museum colleagues had early on suggested Dorchester House as a possible location. Most photos just show the front and side, and I was not convinced until my partner found this 1895 map. I have indicated where I believe the different scenes were shot. Remember the lodge at the bottom. Here's one of the few photos showing the back of the building. If you need further proof, one of the distinctive Stanhope Gate lodges on the other side of Park Lane appear in the film. For various reasons, I believe the film was made in the summer of 1918, not least the fact that both Diana Somerset and Lady Essex appear in the same hats in other contexts in July that year. We now know that we have been observing a very select group of people, described by Philip Ziegler in his biography of Diana Cooper. Within this already exclusive group, he refers to the traditional upper class here, some 50 or 60 great families preserved a status glorious out of all comparison with lesser mortals. Their palaces, their possessions, their vast estates were the envy of the world. They were no parasites, nor were they wholly caste-ridden. Some of them were cultivated. Most of them were tolerably polite, even to members of the lower and middle classes. Their pride, however, was overweening, their self-confidence astonishing, their inbred sense of superiority daunting to all who did not share their advantages. The world, by and large, took them at their own valuation. Ziegler was describing the 1890s, but his description would still have been apt in 1918. So why was an intimate glimpse behind the scenes of the uber-elite mistaken for fashion promotion? I think there are a number of reasons. Maybe not all, but most of the women seem fashionably dressed. Their clothes fit, they are fully accessorized with hats, bags, jewelry, and white gloves. They wear or carry their summer furs. At least one young woman conforms with her height, slim figure, and facial features to contemporary ideas of what a model should look like. The film has two other features that could have added confusion. Encounters between fashionable ladies greeting each other in a somewhat fake and exaggerated way are somewhat of a cliché for early fashion films. This is a clip from another Pathé reel. There's no information on Pathé about what it shows. Likewise, in our film, some women seem to play to the camera. More important for this case of mistaking identity, I think, are the sequences when the women attempt to form a fashion parade. Caroline Evans has drawn attention to the leitmotif of synchronized female bodies in the early 20th century, and to chorus lines as symbolic representations of industrial production processes. She also pointed to the visual links between the fashion show and the military parade, a connection that is particularly pertinent in 1918. Lineups of actors on the stage would have been familiar to the film's protagonists. They regularly appeared themselves in society magazines, lined up in front of charity bazaar stalls. But these lineups are static, made up of different bodies, and far from the ideal chorus line. More aligned with the parades in the Pathé film are the snapshots of women walking towards the camera, which are such a feature of early society magazines. While the latest fashions from the Bois are usually shown on individual women, in England, society is more often snapped in small groups. Sometimes several photos are combined to extend the line. The walk towards the camera is also a popular feature of contemporary fashion films. Here is another example from the French Pathé reel. In a chorus line, the individual dancer has to relinquish her individuality and become anonymous. She's also a slave to the rhythm and has to submit her body to the symmetry of the parade. It is odd that the female members of the British elite we have encountered chose or agreed to play at or with the fashion parade idiom. After all, at the time of shooting, they were the opposite of anonymous. Maybe this is why the experiment does not work. There is not enough discipline, and the line soon gets broken each time. Caroline Evans also mentions the historical invisibility of the real embodied mannequin. When these women were playing at mannequins, they were considered to be extraordinary. Maybe they would be surprised to find out that the people who made their clothes are now the ones featuring in magazines and films, where they have been all but forgotten.